Here to discuss, NewsNation political contributor Denise Gitsham, also a former aide to President George W. Bush. And Denise, we always love having you on the show. So as
Great to be here.
Joe alluded to there, the president, he campaigned on not getting involved in long, drawn-out military engagements. We have so many unknowns up in the air right now. Do you believe the president is making an effective case to the American people that this operation was, in fact, the right move at the right time?
I think personally, as a conservative, I do think that he's making the right case. But of course, it really depends on your perspective. And one thing my mother taught me ever since I was a child is that what's popular isn't always right, and what's right isn't always popular. If you know your history, you'll know that 90% of Americans were opposed to American engagement in World War II. And President Roosevelt only engaged after America was actually struck. And so, learning our history, we should realize that if we're not involved on the front end to prevent or regimes like Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terror, from actually acquiring nuclear weapons. If you haven't learned that part of history and you haven't understood what comes out of Americans sitting on the sidelines and saying, you know what, we're just going to let these rogue nations do whatever they want to threaten Americans, to Americans, kill our allies, to do all the other things we know Iran's done, then really, like, what are you saying? Like, whose side are you actually on? It's very confusing to me that we would be at all split, because I'm so convinced that this action that President Trump has taken is 100% on the side of righteousness, truth, and justice.
Well, and I hear you, and I think there are so many who agree with that. And just like the tariffs, many people may be behind the mission overall, but then the devil's in the details, and there are some elements to all of this that can certainly swing the dynamics. When we talk about this sort of military intervention, some of those calculations being the timeline, the resources, the U.S. lives lost in all of this. So what do you believe are the biggest calculations, also through a political lens, that the president is weighing right now?
Well, I actually don't know how much the president is considering political calculations. There's a whole MAGA base that is totally isolationist. I'm certainly not part of that group. And I am more on the side of think where most Americans, at least on the center right, are. And I think that there are real political calculations only because we're in the midterms. I think everyone in Congress has a vested interest in how they appear, where they are on the record when they vote on this war powers resolution next week. Everyone has something that they're trying to prove to their constituency, unfortunately. And the reason that's unfortunate, because it usually puts political calculations, testing the winds of politics, above doing what's actually right. And I think that anytime you have a president that may not be popular at the beginning of jumping into a war or any sort of military strikes, it's never popular. Anytime a president decides to do what's right and in the best interest of Americans, history will prove that they were on the right side of history.
Well, and I believe, what the major unknown in all of this is how this shapes out, what the ultimate outcome is. And so without that knowledge at this hour, when you do talk about, taking the political temperature, and this war powers vote that Joe had mentioned is likely more about getting lawmakers on the record on this issue than anything else. Depending on the outcome here, how consequential do you see those votes being in November? Because we know the midterms typically center around domestic issues, the economy, how people are feeling confidence-wise when we talk about their pocketbooks.
Sure. The economy is always going to be the number one indicator of how people are going to vote. People don't vote to say thank you. People vote to say you're in trouble. That's usually what rallies people to come out and vote, is a vote against something rather than for or in gratitude. And so if the economy isn't fixed, we have plenty of domestic issues that we need to address, and the economy is at the top of that list. So President Trump is going to have to prove that he can walk and chew gum, that he can really eliminate this threat from Iran, and also address the real legitimate needs of Americans at home. And I'm certain that he has the staff and all the right people there that can handle this issue. But again, this was something that could not have been delayed. This was a decision that he had to make because the timing was right. And I believe that if this generation doesn't appreciate what he's done, every generation from here on out will.
All right, and that is certainly the argument that is being made. on the administration side. Denise Gitsham, always great to see you. Thank you.
Really.
Well, coming up.